Hello, adventurers, weary travelers. Let's do something different today. Allow me to immerse you in some Arcadian history. We've explored mages and knights, monsters and dragons, but Arcadia is home to wondrous races, like the elves and the dwarves. But let's enter the realm of men for a moment, specifically, Adelgis. It was not always known as the Splintered Kingdom. Over 500 years ago, it was the most powerful kingdom not just in the south, but all of Arcadia. Before it was Adelgis, this land was known as Sunheim. As the kingdom of Sunna is known as the Northern Light, Sunheim was the Southern Light. Sunheim was once blessed by the elves, long before the wars of man shattered such allegiances. Prosperous and strong, the kingdom survived Wormkrieg, the Dragon Wars. But that's a story for another day. What I can tell you today is that Sunheim rose like a pillar of hope in Arcadia. Peace reigned for generations. This was until the great King Rorik II, fell to illness. Rorik was a well-respected king who had prevented multiple battles with elves and was a direct descendant of Rorik I, the famed dragon slayer. He was also the founder of the Order of Stars, a knight group that protected Sunheim for decades. They were the first true paladin order in Arcadia. Unfortunately, even the greatest of heroes cannot beat sickness with swords. Rorik was not without successors, though. He had 3 sons, Ragnar, Thorik, and Isaiah. Upon the great king's death, the throne was left to his oldest, Ragnar. Ragnar was a great warrior, but he was known for his ferocious temper. His brother Thorik did not agree with his father's decision to hand the throne to him. Thorik was the more cunning of the 3 brothers, and he had aspirations of his own. Isaiah, however, attempted to quell the ensuing fight between the two, and was inadvertently drawn into their war for the throne. Thorik and Ragnar fought to attain the kingship, while Isaiah merely wanted to prevent a full-on civil war. Unfortunately for the 3rd brother, civil war had become inevitable. Factions had been forged, lines were drawn. These 3 factions fought for supremacy, or in the 3rd's case, peace. Ragnar gathered his forces in the city of Blickwell due to its strategic advantage in both elevation and fortitude. Having such titanic gates to deal with the tempestuous storms that plagued the area, it was perfect for a garrison of berserkers and ferocious warriors. Thorik chose the city of Fjörhelm due to its connections with mercenary guilds. The town was perfect to conscript an entire force of fighters to do his bidding. Hidden in the shadows of the southern marsh, it made the use of cavalry as an offense on the city nearly impossible. So Isaiah chose Ostheim. Ostheim, much like Blickwell, was blessed with walls carved into the southern mountains. This gave it a strategic advantage with its positioning, but he also chose this as it was the city who held the most loyalty to his recently deceased father. The people here held a loyalty to him not through anger or fear, but of respect. The Order of the Stars had been disbanded by Thorik, but their remnants chose to gather here with Isaiah in his father's memory. Isaiah was not the strongest warrior or the most intellectual scholar, but he had a heart. He was honest, he loved his people. In this he drew strength and wisdom that made him a far greater leader than his brothers. It also captured the eye of another warrior, a shield maiden named Signa. Signa was once the lieutenant of the Order of Stars, and perhaps one of the greatest swordsmen in all of Sunheim, maybe even all of Arcadia. She was powerful and a strong-willed woman, far more outspoken than Isaiah. Nevertheless, the two fell in love. She was the sword to his shield. But war brings out the worst in people. Ragnar went on a rampage across the kingdom his forefathers had spent centuries building, and in a matter of 2 years, it was fractured beyond repair. Due to Thorik's arrogance, Fjörhelm was corrupted and filled with criminals. It was now a city shrouded in darkness with an intensity far beyond the marsh that surrounded it. Ragnar and Thorik had clashed on and off for years, each gaining land over the other before yielding it back to their brother. Isaiah, however, had not given up a single inch of his father's homeland. His knights had grown to love and respect him, especially under the leadership alongside his love, Signa. The 2 warriors married and had a child, a boy aptly named Rorik III, after Isaiah's father and grandfather, and a girl named Istrid. after the first queen of Sunheim. They were happy together, even in the darkest of times. After years of fighting in what seemed like an endless war, Ragnar and Thoric did something that was so unexpected it would forge the future of history in Arcadia. They formed a temporary alliance to defeat Isaiah. This was known as the Shadow-Stringed Pact. Unbeknownst to the rest of the kingdom, Thoric had begun to dabble in necromancy. Now, not only was the art outlawed, it betrayed everything his father stood for. Thoric had become lost in fell tomes and darkness from the west. Ragnar was so blinded by a need to prove himself to be the greatest warrior that he was ignorant to what his brother had become. The two marched on Ostheim, and as they gazed on the glorious walls of the city of 1,000 echoes on the wind, storm clouds formed in the distance. Brought with them was an army of berserkers, mercenaries, and undead known as Draugr. But Isaiah had a secret weapon of his own, the New Order of the Stars, now known as the Order of the Southern Star. These paladins, so devout in their quest for justice and peace, had grown powerful beyond what the two brothers could have imagined. One of the greatest battles in Arcadian history had now begun. Ostheim was under siege. The reformed paladin order relentlessly slaughtered Draugr with their powers of light. Blood was spilled that could fill the elven rivers. Isaiah appeared to be holding the advantage, but the walls would not hold forever. He and Signa rode out with the rest of the order to meet the enemy forces for one final charge. They swept through the Nightstring forces without much resistance. This was until Thoric revealed an even darker secret. Stabbing Ragnar in the back with a cursed blade, he sacrificed his own brother. This sacrifice fulfilled a dark pact that to this day is not known what elder god or demon forged. Thoric had now become undead himself, bathing in his brother's blood. The ominous magical power he now possessed allowed him to systematically kill the Order of the Southern Star one by one, all the way down until Signa was the last one who stood before him. Her powers of light were not to be trifled with, but they were outnumbered. The reinforcements were cut off by a new flood of undead that had begun to rip from the earth. Thoric's power was growing, and he aimed to kill his brother. Summoning a spear from a dark plane, he threw it towards his brother, who was caught in the heat of battle. But it did not hit Isaiah. No. Just before impact, Signa had leapt forth in front of the projectile, and it pierced her stomach, impaling her in front of her husband. Isaiah held Signa until the last beat of her heart, which was only filled with love, even until the very end. This moment broke Isaiah. His heart and soul were shattered. Screaming to the gods in this hellscape of a battlefield, he shouted so loud that it shook the heavens. He called to any god who would listen. This was known as the scream that broke the heart of the world. Isaiah, perhaps the most loved man in Arcadia at this point, had lost himself. And a god did answer his cries. Standing before him was Lokir, a dark god. And in this moment, Isaiah did not care. As time froze and the god walked over to him, he was given an offer. "I hear your cries, mortal. I can help you," he said with a devilish grin. "I will give you the power you seek to win this battle, and I will even have your loved soul ferried to the grandest halls of her forefathers. But it will come at a price." Isaiah did not care. He was engulfed in pain and regret. He blamed himself for his wife's death and the death of the Order, as much as he wanted to stop Ragnar. That was his brother who had just died. And what stood across the battlefield from him was no longer Thoric. It was a monster who had taken everything from him. "I care not of the cost. I only want revenge." Good. Isaiah was given power from a god, but it made him into something far different than the beloved leader he once was. His heart was hollow and fractured on all sides. His armor turned dark and his skin to glass. Now a hulking monster with godly power, he decimated the entire battlefield. Charging towards his brother, he engaged him in battle. This battle of titans seemed like it would last an eternity, until Isaiah turned the necromancer to glass and smashed him to pieces. The enemy army was decimated, and Ostheim still stood. But Isaiah was no more. He was a shell of the man he once was, a monster consumed by revenge. The price he had paid was the very thing that made him who he was. His heart. His soul now belonged to Lokir, never to be reunited with his love in the afterlife. Cursed to live an immortal, joyless life, he left Ostheim and entered the woods. It is said that the only thing that can release him from this curse is to be struck in the heart by the spear that killed his love. But after that battle, the spear was lost, never to be seen again. Isaiah is now known to the world as the Shattered King, wandering the elven woods for eternity. Sunheim, however, was now leaderless, all three brothers slain. Each of the three great cities came together on the fields of this once bloody battle. Here they signed a peace treaty, and the three great provinces were formed. Where Ostheim resided would now be the Wintland province. Where Furhelm stood became Bineland, and Blickwell now resides in Sturmland. Sunheim was renamed into Adelgis, the Splintered Kingdom. Each province has its own king, but a permanent alliance remains between them. Civil wars never to happen again. Isaiah's son went on to become a great king in Ostheim, responsible for rebuilding much of Adelgis. If not for him, the kingdom likely may have never recovered. Though nowhere near its former glory, the kingdom owes much to him. Istrid became a warrior much like her mother, but left for Asteria, the Elven Kingdom, just before its great fall. But that is also a story for another time. The Southern Star constellation was renamed after Signa, and even though Adelgis is no longer the brightest light, it still ignites a path for men where it can. Hey, I hope you guys enjoyed this pilot episode of History of Arcadia. I won't be uploading these as often as the Tales of Arcadia, but I would like to supplement those stories with some history and lore of the world. If you did enjoy this, please let me know. Like, comment, subscribe, you know what to do. And if you'd like to check out my other work, follow me at Poems and Embers on Facebook. You can also find a link to my book, Wings of Heaven, down below. And do check out the Tales of Arcadia, Episode 1, The Pale Knight, and Episode 2, The Red Mage. Thanks again.